In Chapter 18, Section 3, we're going to look at energy transfer through an ecosystem. So you'll need to be able to contrast between producers and consumers, explain the role of decomposers in an ecosystem, contrast a food chain and food web, and then also explain why an ecosystem usually only contains a few trophic levels. So energy is just what's needed to maintain homeostasis, to grow, to reproduce, and it's going to determine how many and what kind of organisms are able to live in an ecosystem. Producers are the organisms that use the sun to make their food energy for themselves and for the consumers. So the sun's the ultimate source of energy, and then the producers use that sun generally through photosynthesis to make food for them and for the organisms that are going to eat them. There's also a process called chemosynthesis, which is where organisms can produce carbohydrates by using energy from inorganic molecules. So there are certain types of bacteria that can do that. Productivity in an ecosystem basically refers to how much energy can be captured at a particular point in time. So gross primary productivity refers to the rate at which producers capture energy, so how much energy from the sun can be utilized by the plants. And then the net primary productivity is how fast biomass or organic material can actually accumulate. And that will vary from ecosystem to ecosystem. For instance, a tropical rainforest has a productivity rate about 25 times greater than that of a desert of the same size. Now, consumers are heterotrophs. So these are organisms like herbivores that eat the producers or the plant eaters, like antelope or deer, lots of grazing animals. Carnivores are going to be consumers that eat other consumers. Omnivores then eat both producers and consumers. So those are your plant and animal eaters. Some other consumers we don't think of as much are detrivores, which are things like vultures that feed on basically the garbage of the ecosystem, the leftovers, stuff that other organisms don't want. And then there's also decomposers, and these are organisms like certain types of bacteria and fungi that just cause decay and then break down the dead tissue material and waste material around them and absorb those nutrients through their roots. So they don't actually go out and ingest their food the way a traditional consumer would, but they absorb those nutrients that they need. So energy is going to flow through an ecosystem through the various trophic levels, and a trophic level is an organism's position within the sequence of energy transfers. So it kind of looks like a food pyramid where your producers are going to be at the bottom. That's the largest level. Those are all the autotrophs, and then the second level would be the herbivores, and then the third and above would be all of your consumers, and the levels are going to get smaller and smaller as you go up. Some implications on the ecosystem: only about 10% of the total energy consumed in one trophic level gets passed on to the next level. So that's why you generally don't have more than 4 or 5 levels. There's simply not enough energy to support higher levels. So for instance, if you started, say we had 100 grams of material down here, in the next level, you'd only get 10 grams. In the next, you'd only get 1. In the next, you'd only get a tenth. So you're greatly reducing your amount of energy each level that you go higher. A food chain would be a single pathway of feeding relationships in an ecosystem. So it generally shows one thing eating another, and so on. A more realistic way to look at it is through a food web, which is basically a whole bunch of food chains that are interrelated. So it's more accurate because we generally don't just eat only one thing. You can see how there's many connections here. Then the arrows point to the organism that is doing the eating. So hopefully now you can look between producers and consumers, know what decomposers are, differences between food chain and food web, and then also why we are only going to have a few trophic levels within an ecosystem.